He always believed his home was the one place in the world where nothing could ever surprise him. A house is supposed to be predictable, silent when you're alone, noisy only when you decide it. But on the night everything changed, Daniel Reed stood at the top of the basement stairs with a strange heaviness in his chest, convinced that the world he thought he understood was beginning to shift beneath his feet. It started with a sound. A soft, almost unnoticeable noise drifting up from the darkness below. Not loud enough to alarm him, but too clear to ignore. At first, he told himself it was the dryer settling, or the old wood creaking in the cold. But as he stood there, holding his breath, the sound came again, the faint scrape of something brushing against the concrete. It wasn't the house. And it wasn't the wind. Daniel flicked on the basement light. Half the bulbs down there had burned out years ago, leaving the bottom half of the staircase swallowed in a dim, yellow glow. The basement looked the way it always did, quiet, dusty, untouched. Still, something inside him whispered that he shouldn't go down tonight. He turned around, trying to shake it off. Early mornings at work, late nights stuck in traffic, maybe his mind was just playing tricks on him. But as he walked down the hallway, he kept glancing back, waiting for the sound to follow. It didn't. Not yet. That night, he barely slept. Not because of fear, but because of curiosity, an uncomfortable kind of curiosity that grows slowly, like a cold hand pressing against the back of your neck. Every home has its mysteries, but what Daniel didn't know was that his had been hiding one for much longer than he could imagine. When morning came, he moved through his routine like nothing had happened. Coffee. Quick shower. Checking his emails before work. Life felt normal again, almost too normal. But when he opened the fridge, something caught his eye, something he hadn't noticed before. A carton of milk, half empty. He hadn't used it. Daniel stood still, staring at it. He lived alone. He checked the rest of the fridge, a missing yogurt, a package of cheese left open. Maybe he'd forgotten. Maybe he'd eaten it half asleep. But he knew himself well enough to understand one thing. He never forgot. Still, he pushed away the thought. Everyone misplaces things sometimes. Everyone has off days. But the more he tried to convince himself, the more a subtle tension began forming behind his ribs. Something was off inside this house. He just didn't know what yet. Later that evening, he returned from work feeling unusually exhausted. The basement sat at the far end of the hallway, its door closed but not fully latched. As he passed it, he noticed something he had missed earlier. A faint line of dust had been disturbed on the floor. As if someone had walked through it. Daniel stopped, staring at the marks. They were small, blurred, and incomplete, but they were there. With a shaky breath, he placed his hand on the doorknob. It felt cold, colder than the rest of the house. When he slowly pushed the door open, a gust of cold air crawled up the stairs, brushing against his arms. The basement wasn't just cold. It felt inhabited. He froze. Part of him wanted to run back into the living room, turn on the TV, pretend everything was fine. But another part, the part that had heard the noise the night before, wanted answers. He flicked the lights again. The basement looked the same. Boxes stacked on old shelves. His tools scattered on the workbench. A rug he'd meant to throw out years ago. Nothing seemed out of place, except for a single blanket lying folded on top of an old storage bin. He didn't keep blankets in the basement. A slow chill moved across his shoulders. Daniel reached out and touched it. It was warm. Someone had used it recently. He swallowed hard, stepping back. His mind raced with explanations. Maybe a friend had visited and borrowed it, maybe he had carried it down months ago, maybe. A soft sound floated up again. This time, it wasn't scraping. It was breathing. Daniel felt the air catch in his throat. He backed away from the staircase, his heartbeat pounding so loudly he could barely hear anything else. He shut the basement door quickly and locked it, as if a simple lock could stop whatever was behind it. For a long moment, he stood there, staring at the door, trying to figure out whether he was losing his mind. He wasn't the type to panic, and he wasn't the type to let his imagination run wild. But deep inside him, an unsettling truth was slowly taking shape. Someone might be living in his house. Someone who knew how to stay hidden. And if that was true, they weren't hiding from the world. They were hiding from him. Daniel took a step back, then another. He wiped his forehead with a trembling hand and tried to breathe normally. Maybe he should call someone. Maybe he should tell someone what he thought he heard. But something inside him whispered that this story was only beginning, and if he wanted to understand the truth, he would have to keep going, step by step, just like the viewer of this video should keep watching, because the darkest part of Daniel's discovery hadn't even surfaced yet. Some secrets don't reveal themselves until you're brave enough, or desperate enough, to face what's hiding in the shadows. And Daniel was about to find out that his home had never truly been empty. Daniel woke up the next morning feeling like he hadn't slept at all. His dreams had been stitched together from shadows and echoing breaths, from the image of that folded blanket and the cold air that climbed up the basement stairs. He tried to shake it off. He made coffee. He checked his phone. He scrolled through the news, the weather, pointless notifications. But behind every word on the screen there was another voice, quiet but persistent. Someone is down there. He walked to the hallway before leaving for work and stopped in front of the basement door. The lock was still in place. The doorknob, when he touched it, felt normal again, no unnatural cold this time. For a second, he almost convinced himself that the night before had been nothing but a tired man's paranoia. Almost. He pressed his ear to the door and listened. Silence. Still, he didn't unlock it. He couldn't. On the drive to work, his brain worked harder than his hands. He replayed every detail of the last few days in his head, the missing food, the milk, the disturbed dust, the blanket, the breathing. He tried to connect them in a way that made sense. The realistic part of him whispered logical explanations. Maybe a raccoon had gotten inside somehow. Maybe a pipe was making strange noises. Maybe the blanket had been left there long ago and simply felt warm from the air in the room. But the realistic part of him had no answer for the sound of a human breath. It had no answer for the cold rush of air when he opened the door. It had no answer for the feeling that someone was watching him from below. At lunch, he barely touched his food. One of his co-workers noticed. "You good, man?" Josh asked, frowning as he sat across from him. Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah. Just tired." "You look more than tired. You look like you saw a ghost." Ghosts would be easier, he thought. He almost told Josh everything. He almost said, "I think someone has been living in my basement." But the moment he imagined saying it out loud, it sounded ridiculous. Like a scene from one of those late-night crime shows he sometimes watched. Besides, what if he really was just imagining things? What if he called the police, they searched, and there was nothing? He'd be the guy who cried intruder. So he swallowed it and changed the subject. All afternoon, his mind kept drifting back to the house. To the locked door. To the blanket that shouldn't be there. By the time he drove home, the sun was low in the sky, dragging long shadows across the neighborhood. His house sat at the end of the street, quiet and unassuming, with its pale siding and small front porch. Nothing about it looked dangerous. And yet, as he parked, he felt like he was pulling up to the scene of a crime that hadn't been discovered yet. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled faintly like coffee and dust. The living room was neat, the couch exactly where he left it, the remote still on the armrest. He walked toward the kitchen, half afraid he'd find the fridge wide open. It was closed. Everything was in place. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to breathe. Then he saw it. On the counter. Beside the sink. A dirty glass. Half filled with water. He hadn't used a glass that morning. He'd drunk coffee straight from his travel mug before leaving. He always did. The air felt like it thickened around him. The quiet in the house turned heavy again, like the silence in a room where someone is pretending not to be there. Daniel walked slowly to the glass and ran a finger along the rim. It was wet. Whoever had used it recently. He set his keys down very softly. No more explanations. No more excuses. Someone was inside his home, and whether they were dangerous or not, he needed to know. He pulled out his phone and hovered over the numbers, 911. Then he stopped. If he called the police, they would come, search the house, tell him whether he was right or crazy. But something about the idea of officers stomping through every room, knocking things over, opening boxes, questioning him like he was guilty, it made his skin crawl. And a smaller, darker thought crept into his mind. If there really is someone down there, how long have they been watching me? He needed proof. He needed to see it with his own eyes. Slowly, an idea formed. Not a brave one. Not heroic. Just, necessary. He went to his bedroom, opened the top drawer of his nightstand, and took out an old webcam he'd used years ago for video calls. The cable was still wrapped around it. He tested it with his laptop. It worked. His heart began to race, not from fear, but from the feeling that he was finally doing something. He spent the next hour searching online, how to record motion, simple surveillance software, using webcams as security cameras. He downloaded a cheap program that detected movement and started recording automatically. Then came the hard part. He plugged his laptop into the charger. He set the webcam to record. And he walked to the basement door. He unlocked it as quietly as he could, every click sounding too loud. The stairs descended into that same yellow haze of half-dead bulbs, the bottom swallowed in shadow. He told himself to breathe. It's just a room. It's your room. Nothing down there owns you. He stepped down one stair, then another, time stretching with every move. The air grew cooler, slightly damp. When he reached the bottom, his chest felt tight but steady. He scanned the basement. The blanket was still there. The boxes. The shelves. Nothing obvious. But he could feel it again, that sensation that the air in this room had recently been disturbed by another body. He picked a far corner of the ceiling, high enough to see the whole area. He fixed the webcam there with tape, pointing it toward the open space, the makeshift storage, the old mattress leaning against the wall that he had meant to throw away. That mattress bothered him suddenly. Why had he kept it? Why had he left it down here? Had someone slept on it? His hands started to sweat. He placed the laptop behind a stack of boxes, out of sight but within range of the cable. He made sure the program was running, that the little red dot blinked whenever something moved on the screen. Then he straightened up and forced himself not to run back up the stairs. He climbed them slowly, calmly, trying to act as if he were alone, just in case he wasn't. When he reached the top, he closed the door and locked it again. The laptop would record anything that moved down there. Any step. Any shadow. Any intruder. For the first time in days, he felt like he had a small advantage. He heated up something simple for dinner, but barely ate. Every few minutes, he looked toward the hallway, toward that closed door, imagining the camera silently watching the empty room, or what he hoped was empty. He turned on the TV just to have some noise in the house. A comedy played, but he barely heard any of it. His mind kept wandering back to the basement. Hours passed. The sun disappeared. Night settled like a heavy blanket over the neighborhood. Around 11, he stood up and walked to his bedroom. But instead of lying down, he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the clock. He told himself he should wait until morning to check the footage. That it would be smarter to sleep, wake up, look at the recordings with a clear head. He lasted 15 minutes. Then he got up and walked back into the hall. The house felt different now, heavier in the dark. He turned on a few lights, just enough to trace the familiar outline of walls and furniture. The hallway to the basement looked longer than usual. He approached the door, feeling his heartbeat in his fingertips. The lock turned with a faint metallic click. He opened the door, listening for any sound from below. Nothing. He descended the stairs, one step at a time, feeling like he was walking into the middle of a question with no answer. When he reached the bottom, he went straight to the laptop, hidden behind the boxes. The screen glowed faintly when he lifted the lid. The program showed a list of clips. It had recorded several times throughout the evening. His throat went dry. He opened the first file. The video showed the empty basement exactly as he'd left it. Dust floating in the beam of the single working bulb. No movement. No sound. Just stillness. He opened the second file. Again, nothing. The timer ticked away, but the room remained untouched. He opened the third, then the fourth. The recordings jumped from hour to hour, each triggered by some tiny motion, maybe a shift in the light, maybe a flicker from the bulb. For a moment, he started to believe that he'd been wrong after all. Then he opened the fifth clip. At first, it looked like the others. An empty room. Silent. Unchanged. The timestamp showed 10:41 p.m. Then, from the far edge of the frame, near where the old mattress leaned against the wall, something moved. It was subtle at first. A slight adjustment in the shadows. The faintest impression that the dark was thickening in one corner. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. The shape grew clearer. A leg. Then a shoulder. Then the full outline of a human figure, unfolding itself from behind the mattress as if the wall had quietly given birth to it. The person moved slowly, carefully, as though they knew exactly how much sound not to make. They were thin, wearing dark clothes that blended into the background. Their hair hung over their face, making it impossible to see their features clearly. They looked around the basement with the ease of someone who had done this many times. This was not their first night here. Daniel's skin prickled all over. The figure walked toward the center of the room, then paused. Their head turned slowly, directly toward the camera's hidden corner. They stared straight at the lens. Daniel stopped breathing. The person didn't panic. They didn't run. They simply watched the camera for a long moment, like someone studying a painting on a wall. Then, with a small tilt of their head, almost a nod, they turned away and moved toward the stairs. The clip ended. Daniel's hands shook so badly he almost dropped the laptop. He hadn't imagined it. He hadn't overreacted. Someone had been living in his basement. And worse, that someone knew he was watching now. As you listen to this, imagine being in Daniel's place, alone with that knowledge, knowing that somewhere between your room and the foundation of your house, a stranger is studying the way you live. If you feel that tightness in your chest, that mix of fear and curiosity, stay with this story, because what Daniel does next will decide whether he gets answers, or becomes just another secret hidden in the dark. He closed the laptop, his breathing shallow. Somewhere above him, the house creaked softly, like it was shifting its weight. Like it was listening. He was no longer sure if he was the only one awake. Daniel didn't remember climbing the stairs. The next thing he knew, he was standing in the kitchen, gripping the counter so tightly his fingers had turned white. His breath came in short, uneven bursts. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house, but it felt too loud, almost intrusive, like it didn't belong in the same world where a stranger had just looked directly into a hidden camera. He set the laptop on the table, afraid to open it again. Afraid of what the next clip might show. But more than that, afraid of what was happening right now, at this exact moment. Was the stranger still down there? Had they left? Were they hiding somewhere else in the house? He checked the front door. Still locked. He checked the back door. Locked too. The windows. All the same. That meant only one thing. The stranger was still inside. Somewhere. His chest tightened as he looked around the living room. His eyes scanned the hallway, the corners, the shadows stretching beneath the furniture. He felt exposed. Vulnerable. Like any second, someone could walk out from behind a door or step quietly behind him. He swallowed hard. He had to stay calm. He had to think. He grabbed his phone again. His thumb hovered over the emergency button, but something made him hesitate. Fear, yes, but something else too. A question. If the stranger knew the camera was there, why hadn't they destroyed it? Why hadn't they gone upstairs? Why hadn't they confronted him? A dangerous thought crept in. What if the stranger didn't want to hurt him? What if the stranger wanted something else? Daniel forced himself to breathe slowly. He needed clarity, not panic. He needed to understand what he was dealing with before he made a mistake he couldn't undo. He took one more look at the basement door, just to make sure it was closed tightly. It was. But the lock. The lock was slightly turned. Not unlocked. Not open. Just touched. As if someone had tested it. Daniel stepped back, pulse pounding against his ribs. He whispered to himself, stay calm, though everything inside him screamed the opposite. He turned off all the lights except a small lamp in the living room. Darkness made the house feel larger, emptier. The night outside pressed against the windows like a second skin. He didn't want to sleep, but he knew he couldn't stay awake forever. He needed a plan. He returned to the table, opened the laptop again, and clicked on the next clip. The new recording started at 10:58 p.m. The basement was empty for a moment. Then, from the far right corner of the frame, the stranger stepped into view again, slower this time, almost cautious. Daniel leaned in. The stranger walked to the exact spot where the camera was hidden. Instead of looking directly at it this time, they crouched beside the mattress and placed something on the floor. A small object. Rectangular. Flat. It looked like a folded piece of paper. Then the stranger did something that froze every muscle in Daniel's body. They turned toward the stairs. Placed a hand on the first step. And lifted their head, as if listening for Daniel's footsteps above. But they didn't climb. They stayed still, waiting. Watching. Then they sat down on the step and leaned their head against the wall, their posture tired, almost defeated. Daniel felt his throat tighten. This wasn't what he expected. This wasn't the behavior of someone trying to attack him. This was the behavior of someone who had nowhere else to go. The stranger stayed in that position for nearly 5 minutes, unmoving, like a shadow resting in the dark. Then they stood, walked back to the mattress, lay down, and disappeared from view. The clip ended. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. This wasn't a burglar. This wasn't someone breaking in to hurt him. This was someone living in the cracks of his life, someone who moved like a ghost at the edges of his home. And now there was a note. He couldn't ignore it. He couldn't pretend this wasn't happening. He needed to see what was written on that piece of paper. But that meant going downstairs. It meant opening that door. It meant stepping into the same room where that stranger had been only hours ago. His breath trembled. Yet something inside him, curiosity, fear, the need for answers, pushed him forward. He grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, held it tightly, and walked toward the basement door. Every step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the door, he pressed his ear against it once more. Silence. He unlocked it slowly, hoping the stranger was asleep. The hinges groaned softly as he opened it. He descended one step. Then another. Then another. The air grew colder again, thick and stale. When he reached the bottom, he stopped and scanned the room with his flashlight beam. Nothing moved. He walked carefully toward the mattress. He saw the note immediately. A small folded paper placed on the concrete floor, exactly where the stranger had left it. Daniel bent down slowly, trying not to make any noise, and picked it up. The paper was thin, worn, like it had been folded many times before. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it. There were only 4 words written inside. 4 words that sent a cold wave through his entire body. I used to live here. Daniel's vision blurred for a second. Used to live here? Who? When? How? For how long? He looked around as if the basement itself would answer him. But all he saw was what he had always seen: boxes, shadows, dust, and now, the undeniable reality that this place had once belonged to someone else. Someone who never left. A sudden sound, light but sharp, echoed from behind him. Daniel spun around, flashlight trembling. At the top of the staircase stood the silhouette of a person. Tall. Still. Watching him. His lungs collapsed. The stranger was awake. They weren't hiding anymore. They had come to face him. Daniel backed up instinctively, his pulse raging in his ears. The stranger didn't move down the stairs. Didn't speak. Didn't rush toward him. They simply stood there, outlined by the dim hallway light, as if waiting for Daniel to say something first. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then, in a quiet, trembling voice that barely sounded like his own, Daniel whispered. "Who are you?" The stranger didn't answer. Instead, they turned. And started walking away. Not down into the basement. Up. Into the rest of the house. Daniel felt the horror of what that meant settle deep inside his bones. This wasn't about the basement anymore. The stranger was inside his home. Moving freely. Leaving the shadows behind. And no matter where Daniel turned next, he wouldn't be alone anymore. Some moments force you to choose between running away or facing the truth. Daniel had reached that moment, and if you're still here listening, stay with this story. Because the most terrifying part isn't what the stranger has done. It's what they're about to reveal. Daniel stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, watching the stranger's silhouette disappear into the hallway. The light from the living room cast a long shadow down the steps, stretching like a dark ribbon toward him, as if inviting him, or daring him, to follow. His instincts screamed run, but something colder, heavier, whispered. If you let him walk away now, you'll never know the truth. Daniel climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like he was rising into a different version of his life, one where he no longer recognized his own home. When he reached the top, the hallway was empty. The stranger had vanished into the house. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and stepped forward. "Hello?" His voice cracked in the silence. No answer. He moved cautiously through the hallway, sweeping the flashlight across the walls, the furniture, the floor. Every corner felt alive with possibility. He checked the kitchen. Empty. The living room. Empty. The guest room. Empty. Then he noticed something. The door to his bedroom was open. He never left his bedroom door open. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he approached. The door creaked softly when he pushed it wider, and the beam of the flashlight swept across his unmade bed, the nightstand, the closet. He froze. The closet door was slightly ajar. Just a few inches. But enough. "Please," Daniel whispered, his voice shaking. "Don't come out. Not yet. Let me understand. Let me, just understand." The closet door opened an inch more. Daniel stumbled back, colliding with the dresser. The stranger stepped forward. This time, Daniel saw the face. Not a monster. Not a criminal. Not the violent specter he had imagined creeping around his home. It was a young man. Thin. Pale. Maybe early 20s. Eyes hollowed by exhaustion, not aggression. His clothes were dusty, worn. His hair tangled. His breathing uneven, like someone who hadn't slept in days. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then the stranger spoke. His voice was calm. Quiet. Almost gentle. I didn't come here to hurt you. Daniel swallowed hard. Then why are you here? Why were you living in my basement? The young man lowered his gaze, as if the weight of the answer was too heavy to speak. It used to be my room. Daniel blinked. Your room? No. I've owned this house for 6 years. Nobody lived here before me except. He stopped. Except the previous owners. The sellers had been an older couple. Private. Never said much. Moved out quickly. Too quickly. Did they? Daniel hesitated. Did the owners before me know you were here? The young man's jaw trembled. His eyes shifted away, glistening with something that wasn't quite fear. They weren't supposed to leave me. A chill traced Daniel's spine. What do you mean? The stranger's voice cracked. They told me they'd come back. They said it was temporary. But they never did. He swallowed, forcing the words through a tightening throat. I lived here, for years. They kept me downstairs most of the time. Said it was better that way. Quieter. Safer. The room tilted slightly in Daniel's vision. Kept. Downstairs. For years. His voice dropped to a whisper. Why didn't you leave? The young man looked up at him, those hollow eyes filled with something deeper than fear. I didn't know how. Daniel's breath hitched. He wasn't looking at an intruder. He was looking at someone abandoned. Someone invisible. Someone who had lived in the spaces of this house long before Daniel ever walked its halls. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel asked softly. Why didn't you come upstairs? The young man shook his head slowly. You seemed normal. Safe. A good person. He paused. I didn't want to scare you. Daniel felt something break inside him. But you hid, Daniel said. You watched me. I had nowhere else to go. His voice cracked again. I didn't think you'd understand. Silence. The house seemed to breathe around them, walls holding memories Daniel had never been told about, floors that had carried footsteps he never knew existed. The young man wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed. I didn't mean to make you afraid, he whispered. I only stayed because it was home. Daniel took a slow, steady breath. He didn't step forward. He didn't step back. All he said was, "What's your name?" The young man hesitated. Then, Evan. Daniel nodded. Okay. Evan. You can't stay here anymore. But you don't have to hide. Not tonight. Evan's shoulders slumped. He nodded too, barely. Daniel called the police, not to arrest Evan, but to help him. When the officers arrived, Evan didn't resist. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He just looked around the house one last time, his gaze lingering on the door to the basement, the only home he had ever truly known. And then he whispered to Daniel. Thank you, for finally seeing me. They took him away gently, promising help. Promising safety. Promising a new start. Daniel watched from the porch, feeling something he hadn't felt in days, relief. Not because Evan was gone. but because the fear was finally replaced by truth. Days passed. The house grew quiet again. Predictable. Ordinary. But Daniel never went into the basement without thinking about the note, the mattress, the years Evan had spent hidden in the dark. Sometimes at night, he would sit on the living room couch with the TV flickering and think about how many people move through life without ever seeing the shadows living right beside them. And every time he thought about it, he found himself whispering, "You're not alone, even when you think you are." Because someone had lived in his home all those years. Someone forgotten. Someone abandoned. Someone human. And for the first time, Daniel understood that the scariest stories aren't about monsters hiding in basements. They're about people hiding in the dark. Hoping someone will find them.